Hey guys, welcome back to the XeroLinux channel, and today we have a special guest, and our special guest is none other than Nick from the Linux Experiment. And in
Hey,
case anybody was living under a rock, tell everybody about yourself.
so I'm Nick. I'm a French guy, and I make a Linux channel on YouTube called The Linux Experiment. I've been doing that for 4.5 years now, almost 5 years. I've got somewhere around 300 or 400 videos, and I've got around 210,000 subscribers or something. That's about
Wow.
it.
I've been doing this for a year, and I've got only 600 subscribers.
Well, let's hope maybe this video will help a bit with that.
Hopefully. Anyway, with you being a news channel, and specifically towards that talks about Linux, I was wondering what made you switch to Linux and why?
Uh, I started using Linux in 2006 because I wanted a Mac at the time and I didn't have the money and I wanted to have something that looked like a Mac. So I bought an old crappy laptop with Windows XP at the time and I tried to customize it to make it look like a Mac and it just broke. It didn't work at all. And I looked up online and I saw that there was something called Ubuntu, which you could theme to look very much like a Mac. So I tried Ubuntu and I stayed on the regular orange Ubuntu theme because in the end I found it looked much better. And that was my introduction to Linux. I used it until about 2013, mostly on Ubuntu on various computers. And after 2013, I didn't really need a computer anymore. I started working, so they gave me like Windows computers at work. And I didn't really touch Linux more until 2018, at which point I just moved back to Brest, which is the city where I live now. I had no hobbies, nothing. I was super bored and I wanted to try and learn something new. I wanted to learn how to edit videos. So I bought the cheapest computer I could find that I supposed could edit videos, and it came without an OS. And I thought, well, you know about Linux, you might as well reinstall it. And so that's where it restarted. So I have experience with older Linux operating systems. I have a gap of about 3 or 4 years where I didn't really use it. And then it's been now since 2018, since I used Linux exclusively. I haven't touched them. Well, I never installed specifically another OS on my computers. I had a Mac at work for about 6 months before I came in with my own Linux laptop. But basically, I'm doing everything on Linux these days: gaming, video editing, recording, everything.
All right. And since you've been doing this for a while, using Linux, for a while, did it increase your, what did it teach you about other OS? Because sometimes we use one OS to learn more about other OSs.
Uh, I think the main thing it taught me was how much I don't like using the other operating systems. It's not saying that they're bad or that no one should use them because they work for some people, they work for certain tasks, and I have nothing against Windows or Mac OS. They are good in their own right. But me personally, it really taught me that what they bring as an experience just doesn't work for me. They're too locked down, they're too immutable. You can't really change how the system works, and you're very restricted in what you can do, in my experience. And I think the second thing Linux taught me is basically how a computer works. Because when I started using it in 2006, my parents had a computer, but I was not allowed to use it all that much. And so I didn't really know much. I knew what a BIOS was, I knew how to enable certain things in it. But in terms of general working, how the CPU communicates with the motherboard, with the RAM, with a GPU, with an SSD, disk, etc., I didn't know anything about this. And in 2006, Linux did not run very well on most devices that you just bought off a computer shop. So I had to tweak a lot of things. I had to install drivers for my USB Wi-Fi dongle and stuff like that. And he taught me a lot about what a driver is, how it communicates with something else, how the hardware interacts with each other. And that was all thanks to Linux. If I had kept using Windows, I probably would never even have been interested in that kind of stuff.
So what you are saying is it turned you into more of a tinkerer than Windows or Mac ever would have.
Into a big nerd, yes.
Yeah. And speaking of which, you've been you used to love first, before I ask this question, I need to ask, what desktop environment do you use on a daily basis?
I use both GNOME and KDE. I have GNOME on my main desktop and KDE on my laptop, and I also have like a tweaked GNOME on another laptop, which is basically what Pop! OS ships by default. Their cosmic remake of GNOME. So the things I learned is that I should have done it the other way, which is use KDE on the desktop because it's way more suitable for that, and GNOME on the laptop because I think that touchpad use is better than what KDE offers. Even though KDE has made a lot of progress with the recent gestures and stuff like that, I still think GNOME is more suitable for a touchpad. So I should probably switch them out at some point. But I use both. I have used Cinnamon, XFCE, I have used Mate as well, but they never really clicked with me as much as GNOME and KDE do. But I do tend to use every desktop environment because I try to talk about old distros and old desktops. So there's at least one laptop that's running something new every month.
Okay, so on the desktop, we covered the desktop environment, but what distro do you prefer and why?
On my desktop, I use Fedora because, well, I use GNOME. And for me, if you want to use GNOME like as intended, like the pure GNOME, you can't really go wrong with Fedora. It's stable. It gets updated every 6 months, but it's also updated very regularly. And they push the technologies that I kind of prefer, like Flatpak, and they're at the forefront of that effort. So I like using Fedora on my desktop. If I had to move to KDE, I would probably move to KDE Neon, although the LTS base is a little bit old for my tastes. Maybe I would try using something Arch-based with KDE, but I would have to be a little bit more careful about the updates than what I do with Fedora, because right now I'm doing the Windows style, which is open the software store, click download, reboot, and you're done. And it works for me right now. But yeah, if I use KDE, probably KDE Neon. And if I ever felt that the base, the LTS base was too old, I would probably try something Arch-based, but maybe something a little bit more regulated than Arch in terms of how updates are pushed.
Well, as we discussed before we started recording, if you want to run Arch, it's more on a Tinker device rather than on a device that you use on a daily for projects, for professional work. But I'm going to attack something a little bit technical. Since you are a news channel, you're up to date with the latest news. What do you think about the recent issue with Grub?
I think it's mainly a communications problem. We discussed a little bit about that before we started recording, but in my opinion, when you're upstream, when you're that upstream, like Grub is or glibc, which we talked about as well, you have some kind of responsibility to your downstream to inform them on the changes. And of course, they're going to inform you on the changes. They're going to let you know in the release notes that they changed something. But if that's something that they can identify as a breaking change, I feel that they should have a big warning or a big message, something that they push towards their downstream users, just to let them know, we changed something, it might have impacts, take a look at it. Because as I said before, I don't think somebody who builds a distro can have the amount of time needed to look at all their upstream projects. You cannot be up to date with the exact amount of changes that Grub does, that glibc does, that Wayland does, that Pipewarrior does. And so when you combine all of that to make your distro, you're going to miss something if it's not clearly labeled. If the upstream doesn't tell you, hey, this is a big change, maybe look it up, maybe try it out, and let us know if something breaks, or if something breaks, well, at least you have time to fix it before you ship it. I think it's a communications issue. They have every right to make breaking changes, that's their project, but they have to think about where their project is used. Grub isn't used in a vacuum. Nobody just installs Grub and nothing else. So it is depended upon by other things, and so I think they should have better communication around these changes. And sometimes you can miss it. You can not identify that your change will break something. But in that case, I think they could have seen it coming.
Like, I agree 100%, and not handle it the way they did, and blame it on us, the distro maintainers, for example. Like, okay, so number one, they did not admit the issue. This is the first error they made. because they switched from stable build of Grub and they started shipping the Git version of Grub as stable. So they started introducing Git changes. The developers of Grub, it's not on them. The developers of Grub are doing what they do on a daily basis. They push commits, they test the commits. It's on the Arch maintainers who maintain that package for Arch, who distribute that package, should look at the code and say, oh, this is a Git commit, so it's in testing. We cannot ship it as stable. We might ship it as grub-git on the AUR, for example, or on the testing repository, but ship it on the main community repository and call it stable. This is the error they made. And the second error they made is not communicating immediately the issue, because to me that shows that they did not test before release. They were like, okay, what they looked at basically was, okay, so the stable version 2.06 has too many CVE issues. So we need to push any version beyond that has those holes plugged, so fixed. For any of you who don't know what plugged means. Once they released that, they didn't, and the other problem is they didn't look at them as being Git commits. They just saw, oh, they got fixed. Okay, Git or not, we're going to ship it as stable. And that result, and without communication, we, the users, I'm not talking about myself in the maintainer aspect. I'm just a user in the end. I received the update in Grub and rebooted my computer as I always do after a major update. And I couldn't boot into my system. And I needed my system to continue working on my distro and other more important stuff. But good thing I am a distro maintainer that I realized to tell my users not to update Grub until further notice. But if I weren't a distro maintainer, I wouldn't have been able to communicate that. So we did the communicating instead of we did the job of the distro maintainers.
Yeah, and you're forced to do it too late because the update is already there. So it's not like, hey, just letting you know there was an update, but we blocked it. It's there's an update, but please don't do it. And that's another problem because that's your image that suffers. Even though in the end users might be able to realize that it's not on you, that something just slipped through the gaps, you still have that image of, okay, they might not test everything that they ship. It reflects on you and your project, your distro.
Yep, that's what happened. So some users, since a lot of users are new to Linux, and I don't recommend new users to start using Arch from the get-go. That's another problem for another day. But if they selected to use an Arch-based distro, and they're new to Linux, any mistake that happens reflects on me because it's coming from my distro. So if something happens upstream because of Arch, the user's not going to see Arch, which is the top. It's going to see the man in the middle, who is me.
Yeah.
So they're going to think that it's my distro that at fault, not upstream, because they don't know about the upstream. So it's on us to communicate all the messages, to know how to communicate. This is what I learned from Linux. By being a maintainer, I learned how to communicate the right way, the right messages. But having to do that instead of the maintainers themselves is a step too much sometimes because we have so much to deal with already.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then there's a glibc issue. The first issue being when it broke easy anti-cheat. They fixed that really quickly, so that's not a problem. For us builders now, glibc broke where it since we use Calamares in our distro. This broke Calamares when it came to the locale generation. There was a file called supported that has to be, in case it's not, the system does not, the installer does not support it, it should delete it. But Calamares is not as bleeding edge as other packages are, so it needs time to update, to fix things. So as a result, users couldn't install XeroLinux because of glibc update. But that was a minor fix. We are shipping the older version out of the box. Users can update later on, no problem. But it's only affecting us builders. But that's, again, there is no communication about that. Nowhere.
Yeah.
Still.
And basically, I think the simple fix is just for projects who know they are an upstream to a lot of others. They did not necessarily decide to be an upstream, but people liked what they did and they based their work upon that. So if you know that you are upstream from a ton of other projects, just try to have the clearest communication as can be to indicate which changes you think might create issues. You cannot identify all of them, but you can at least be transparent and put big warnings like, okay, if you pull in this new version in your distro, in whatever, just be wary of this, maybe try it out first. That's it. That would be enough to put a little indicator for maintainers and distro creators, knowing that they have to look out for something specific.
At least communicate this internally to us maintainers. But then again, Arch cannot know who is based on them. There's so many Arch distributions.
And that's why they could just have a small updates page that is specifically geared towards anybody who wants to base their work on Arch, saying, we have this package that is coming through the updates. There might be something in it. Maybe look at it. And then you have one source that you can go check on when you're a distro based on Arch. You can go check on that page. They have the Arch Wiki, which is like the biggest Bible for Linux tweaking, configuration, fixing. Adding one step for this for the recent updates doesn't seem like it would add that much work. And it's just something that is expected from a distro that is used by so many other distros as a base.
Which brings me in line to my next question. You made a video about this recently. And since I watch every single video you put out there, since
thank you,
you have a wonderful sense of humor in your videos. I love that. But do you think there's a lot of too many distros out there causing a little bit of gearing towards fragmentation?
I have mixed feelings about this because on the one hand, yes, absolutely. Like you introduce someone to Linux, you're not going to talk to them about, hey, have you heard about Ubuntu? You're going to tell them, have you heard about Linux? Oh, it's that great operating system, blah, blah, blah. You explain everything. And then that person is going to look up online, Linux, how to install Linux. And they're going to see thousands and thousands of versions. And we as Linux users know that there are only like maybe 5 or 10 big major Linux distros that you should start with. But a normal user isn't that guided. And when they go onto forums, they're going to have people saying, you should only use Mint, only use Ubuntu, only Fedora, Elementary OS. Some will say, use Arch, use Gentoo, it's the best. And yeah, you don't know what to make of it. And even certain websites that have been created to try and mitigate the issue, like I think it's Distro Chooser, which asks a few questions, which is really well laid out. It's a really small survey that you fill in with, I want a simple desktop, I want something that looks like Windows, I'm able to fix my problems myself or not. And then it offers a list of distros. But it doesn't filter that to 2 or 3 distros. It displays like 50 of them with their various advantages and negatives compared to what you indicated, which doesn't help because you're like, okay, but which one is the one I should use? And people want to be guided on this when they start with Linux. And once you've put your foot through the door and you started using Linux, then you'll start to notice. You'll learn your desktop environment. You know if it's for you, not for you, if you want to build your own using a tiling window manager, whatever. And then you learn the insides of the distro. But you should start with the basic experience, the desktop experience, if you want to use a distro that has a graphical user interface. That's the first thing. And then you can start exploring and playing around and testing and distro hopping and whatever. And at that point, having too many distros isn't an issue at all. It's a strength, actually, because you know there's something out there for basically everyone. That everyone can be served by a specific Linux distro if they look hard enough. The problem is for real beginners who don't have a lot of computer experience, they either are lost or they will stick to something that might not be the best for them because they're scared or they're not sufficiently capable of looking up stuff online for themselves. And I know some people will answer, well, if you don't know how to use your computer, you should not use Linux, whatever. But for me, that's not the mentality. Like, we want to bring more people into Linux because more users means more potential developers, more potential contributors, more testers, and generally more interest. So projects get bigger, get better. It's good to have more users. So we just need to find a way to funnel them and help them pick a distro. So there's the two the two sides of the coin, and I'm really mixed on this. I don't know if I think it's a big problem or if it's just a minor annoyance.
The bigger problem is not only do you have a massive amount of distros, but each distro has various versions of it. So like XeroLinux, you got 26 ISOs or however many. For each desktop environment, you got a separate distro. And you mentioned this in what Linux features should distros have. Love that video because everything you mentioned, there's at least 30% of those things in XeroLinux. So, but still, if you offer, even if you offered one installer, like you mentioned in your video, that unified all the desktop environments in the installer instead of having a different ISO for each desktop environment, that's still confusion because the user is not going to know what's the difference between KDE, what's the difference between KDE and GNOME, and what's this window manager? What's a window manager? And this is even more confusion. Okay, XeroLinux was built on one of the assumptions that this suits my needs. I built XeroLinux to fit my needs. It doesn't necessarily fit everybody else's needs, but I'm putting it out there for people who share the similar needs or similar requirements. Basically, nothing on the nothing pre-installed. You can shape it. I can shape it however I want, but I need a stable desktop environment that looks good, that works out of the box, and then I can install whatever I want, shape it however I want. This is XeroLinux, in short. But it doesn't satisfy everybody's needs. Maybe somebody wants something out of the box to have all the audio editing software out of the box because he's a audio studio, for example. MX Linux mitigated that by having an audio version of their distribution where it's only geared towards audio studios.
Yeah, like Ubuntu Studio, which has like the low latency kernel and a bunch of tools pre-installed.
These kind of distros are the distros that are worth to be out there because they're very although it targets a niche kind of people, still those niche they have their distro. It's for them. This is for them. But my problem is with distros like XeroLinux. XeroLinux, it was just a passion project for me, for my system. I didn't want to put it out there, but friends kept insisting, so I put it out there. But the problem with Linux is there's a lot of similar distros that do the similar thing, like DistroTube put it in one of his videos. All the distros are a coat of paint on the same thing, on the same base. So we are not, for example, me and XeroLinux and Endeavor and others like that, we are not really distros. We're just convenience. We're just more of a, we're staying out of your way, but you can get that if you do it yourself anyway, but we're doing it for the lazy people who don't want to do it.
It's a spin on something else.
Yeah.
It's not a carbon copy of something that exists. It's not like if you shipped Ubuntu with another theme and that's it. You do a lot more work than that. But it's a spin on something that people could recreate, absolutely. But maybe some people want to have it out of the box and not have to redo it on every computer or every time they want to install.
Yeah, and I prefer distros like Manjaro, like Ubuntu, like Fedora. Those are distros. Another Nobara I call that a distro because he's not spinning something; he's giving you a gamer's distro.
Yeah, it has a specific focus.
Yes, it's very tweaked to a certain level that I chose it over regular Fedora. Like for a gamer, having to do everything that Glorious Eggroll did on Nobara will take maybe a week, 2 weeks, because you have to read on how the Linux kernel that he shipped works. He ships with the TKG, everything TKG basically. TKG Wine, TKG Proton, his Proton, sorry. It's Glorious Eggroll after all. but TKG kernel and patches to that kernel on top. He did a very good job. He's not shipping a distro that, for example, Fedora was just another theme slapped on top. He did a lot of work and a lot of research. There are some caveats to Nobara, however. Flatpaks will not be very quick, very responsive, at least on first launch, because Nobara uses XeroLinux under the hood, which needs to scan the container at every launch. Not very, but XeroLinux is security, so it's a secure, conscious distro as well. So everything comes at a cost. But giving you, for example, Fedora with just KDE and a themed KDE, this is not a distro. This is a spin. This is so the term distro should not be generally used.
Yeah, and I think just talking about it, I think that there might be something that we could try and get our minds together and do, which is some kind of seal or certificate, or I don't know, or a specific program that distributions could enter, being like, okay, we are like a distro that is used by a lot of people. We have X amount of documentation. We have X amount of users. We have updates that are consistent. We regularly update our thing. We work on our own projects. And that would maybe, I don't know, create some kind of program or category of distributions that could be identified by a logo, whatever, or just a web page. Just saying, okay, these are big distros. These are the big ones that people have agreed upon. Maybe not everybody thinks they're good distros, but at least they have their own independence. They do their own thing. They're important ones. And then below that, you would have all the spins, which are interesting and serve a niche and serve a purpose, but maybe should not be recommended to beginners to begin with. Maybe they should start with one of these distros that we all agreed should be part of this, I don't know, certified program, whatever. And the rest is like, it's fun. You want to play after you know Linux, you want to discover, you want to try things out. You have all these spins and all these distros that are smaller and do a little bit less than the bigger ones, but have their own purpose as well.
You're onto something right there. One of the guys on the XeroLinux team is more of a manager type of person. He's not a maintainer or anything. He's just a manager. He's got this idea of creating the super distro, hero distro, if you want, that makes everything. How should I put it? That does the hand holding for people. But what you just said right there coincides with a little bit with this idea. So we might work on that, but the problem with Linux, as we discussed before the recording, is the mentality of users. Unfortunately, a lot of users, we're not generalizing, we're just saying a lot of users insert what I call poison into, or are poisonous to Linux. They think that the distro they use is the only distro that should exist, and users who use anything else are dumb to use anything else. Unfortunately, a lot of places where users go to ask for help, they get, if you don't know how to do this, you shouldn't be using Linux. Install Windows, install Mac, and get away from here. I understand that even Windows has the same type of users, so does Mac. But we're talking about Linux here, and Linux is the smaller base. So the others are big. So we cannot talk about them. They're corporations, they're backed, they have millions upon billions of dollars. Linux does not have that. Arch, zero. It's community based. They will never ask you for your. They're not ever going to go in bed with Microsoft or Apple. So do not push users away because they don't know how to do it. Everybody started from somewhere. So be friendly and let the Linux community grow instead of pushing them away.
Yeah, and the worst thing is that probably most of these let's say poisonous users, they started at the same place. They weren't born with an innate knowledge of Linux, and maybe when they started using Linux, it was a less easy experience. Maybe they had a little bit more to tweak and to do, like I did when I started. My first experience with Linux wasn't smooth sailing at all. I had a ton of issues that I had to fix. But it doesn't mean that I turn into some kind of elitist guru that's saying, hey, you know what? You never had to compile your own Wi-Fi drivers, so you suck. And if you don't know how to do that, go back to Mac. That's nonsense. You had to learn yourself. Why would you prevent others from learning and asking questions? I don't understand why people do this.
I've had that in when I started with Linux. I didn't have as much of a rocky start as you did because I started using Linux in 2019. So for me, my first experience with Linux was Manjaro KDE, and I've been using KDE ever since because, well, KDE you must admit KDE can be a love at first sight. So I was like, okay, I had a few issues. I went to the Manjaro forums. Manjaro forums have less of a toxic nature than Arch forums, but still, I got some toxic people, but I worked my way around it by rephrasing my requests, by saying, apologizing and putting the apology hat on, and I circumvented all that. That's easy on the Manjaro forums, but try to go to on the Garuda forums or on the Arch forums. This is where toxicity lies. Garuda, I'm not talking about the developers. I'm talking the users.
Yes. Some people in the community around these distros.
Yeah. So they tell you, okay, you don't know how to do this. Why are you using Linux in the first place? Like, here's one thing. I am a distro maintainer, so people expect me to be a developer automatically.
Yeah, which is...
I am not a developer.
Building a distro has virtually nothing to do with code. You could just you stack things, you decide which things you want to do, you stack them and you build them into an ISO. It doesn't mean that you have to write some code to do it.
Exactly. So I get a lot of hate, like, okay, so you're maintaining a distro and you don't know anything about coding? Oh, I'm not gonna trust this distro. That distro might as well be a virus. If you don't know how to code, maybe you're shipping something broken. I'm not gonna trust this distribution. Another situation where people start poisoning is, oh, you don't sign your packages on your repo. We don't trust unsigned packages. Why would we? We don't know you. Okay, so I don't know you, so don't use my distro. There's a million other distros who sign their packages.
And that's an absolutely stupid thing, because they wouldn't know you even if you signed the packages. So why would they trust your certificate?
Yeah, so even people who sign their packages, they could distribute malicious code via signed package. I don't understand what that has to do with anything. But still, I tell those users, I now have a thicker skin, and I just reply to users, if my distro doesn't satisfy your security needs, there's a lot of security conscious distros out there that you can switch to. I'm not forcing you to use my distro. That's why now I have a cool person on the team. I nicknamed him on Discord SecNav. In the States, SecNav is security, naval security, basically, in the Navy. So I called him SecNav because he's very secure-minded, and he's going to help XeroLinux be more secure. And since XeroLinux is a freedom type of distro, I'm not going to be including it by default on the distro. It's going to be offered as an option. You want it to be a secure distro? You can shape it to be so. You have a guide on our forums. So since he's security conscious, he's going to write a very detailed guide on what a person should do to secure a distro, and since XeroLinux is Arch based, whatever he writes can be applied to any Arch distro out there. It's not specific to XeroLinux, it's Arch. So you can apply it on Arco Linux, on Endeavor, well, not Manjaro, but on others. So I don't know, this elitism that says, no, if you don't know how to secure your own distro, you shouldn't be using Linux. And this mentality should stop, because Linux is in dire need, specifically now, to grow. And I know the Steam Deck is helping it a little bit. And that was a great job by Valve. But we'll talk about that in a bit. Still, please, people, don't treat each other badly. Help XeroLinux grow. Okay, so now I want to ask about Okay. All right. Yeah, I was going to ask you, since we're here to talk about Linux. You used to make videos about applications, letting people know about new applications and new tools, new tweaks uh, they should use. You don't make single app videos now. Now you group them, as you told me before the recording. You group them multiple applications in a single video. What made you change from?
It's mostly a viewer's interest, basically. When I talked about a single app, I don't know, when I made a video about Planner, for example, which is a to-do list app, well, it really speaks to people who like to-do list apps, but I really had to stretch the explanation about the app to last for more than 3 or 4 minutes, which means I had to like talk about the developer, talk about what it did, and then really explain each feature. And that can be interesting, but it's also not interesting to a lot of other people. So now I tend to do grouped videos where I talk about a bunch of specific apps in a bunch of specific domains. And so I made one for GNOME, made one for KDE, I think I made one for Elementary OS back in the day as well. And I think these tend to appeal to more people because there are a lot of apps that get released every week. Like if you look at this week on GNOME or this week on KDE blog post that they do, there are new apps like literally every week. There's a new app on a new app update, and a lot of people don't really know about them because well, they're small. They don't have communication teams. They just release, and the only way they're promoted is through these GNOME or KDE blog posts. So if you don't read them, you don't know about them. So sometimes it's good to have this kind of compilations and explain. Okay, well, if you want to do to-do list, then you have this app, this app, this app. If you want to do graphics design, you have this one, this one, this one, etc. And these videos tended to work pretty well. So I'm probably going to keep this format for now. I will only do like individual app videos when it's a pretty big application. Like for example, Bottles, which I did, I think it was 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And this app can do a lot of things. It covers a lot of game launchers and other programs. And in my mind, it has the potential to be like the new Play on Linux, which is like this app that lets you install various Windows programs in one click. It was basically Lutris, but for everything, not just games. It's not maintained anymore, as far as I know, and most of the scripts have broken down since then, and it's not that efficient anymore. But I think Bottles could be the thing that replaces it as soon as they start having more of a community that builds the script. So I think it's interesting to bring focus to this one because, well, it's an app I really want to see grow. Because for my own interest, I want to have like those simple installers for specific programs that don't exist on Linux, just for fun. So I want to attract attention to this one, and it's big enough that I can make a dedicated video. But for example, let's say Amberroll, which is the new GNOME music player for local music. It's a beautiful app. It looks great. But if I make a video about it, it's going to last 5 minutes because it doesn't do that much. And if I do a specific video for, I don't know, K project manager, same thing. It's too niche and too complex, so a lot of people will just not be that interested. And so for me, as I have a limited number of videos I can make per month, I still have to choose the ones that I think will talk to the most people.
Like, for example, you can make videos about tips and tricks for a certain app if you see it's worth it. But speaking of Bottles, you like the new user interface that shows the cover art on the front?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, do you have any favorite applications? Speaking of applications, do you have any favorites in 3 different categories: gaming, production, I mean media production, since you make videos, and overall productivity?
For gaming, I'll probably say Heroic Games Launcher because I don't have that many games on Epic Games. I just grabbed the free ones. I think the only ones I bought were Borderlands 3 and The Outer Worlds. I think all the other ones I have there were just the free games that they distributed. But the developers have made such a great application to run those things. It's amazing. Like you have basically the exact same functionality as Steam and Steam Play, but for Epic Games, which has never intended that to work. They have an open API, which is used by Legendary, which is the backend for Heroic after that. But they never intended anyone to build another client. They just made the API open, probably because people could help them identify issues. It was probably in their self-interest. And yeah, they made something really amazing. And so that's not the app I use the most because I don't have many Epic games, but I think they really did an awesome job for that. So that would probably be my favorite app for gaming.
Doesn't it also work for Battle.net and others as well?
I think it only does GOG and Epic Games, but they might be planning to add other launchers as well in the future. Yeah, but for now, Bottles does they do Origin, they do Battle.net, they do Epic Games, they do basically all launchers but Steam. But Heroic for now, I think is just well, I can check. It's just Epic Games and GOG for now.
And for media production, other than OBS,
for media production, free and open source or not?
Of course, we're talking free open source.
Free and open source, that would be Kdenlive. I think it's like the best free and open source video editor we currently have. I think it will get surpassed by Olive, which is something that has GPU acceleration and it's growing quite fast. It's not stable right now. I think it's still in alpha, or it just moved to beta, and it just doesn't do as much for now. But I think it doesn't have as much legacy code to deal with as Kdenlive, so I think they're going to move faster, and in a few years they'll probably be even better. But Kdenlive it's the complete studio. You can do color correction, you can do audio work, you have tons of effects, you have tons of plugins you can do, and even though it doesn't really use the GPU, it's not slow if you have a good CPU. It's only slow in the preview window, where if you start stacking a few logos, images, and effects, then you're gonna play back your stuff at like 2 FPS, and it's not that useful. But for rendering, it's not that slow.
And the fact that they're monetizing now the project, so they're trying to fundraise the fundraiser.
And one of the big points of the fundraiser is also trying to improve performance, which I think they can only do if they do GPU acceleration. So I think that might be what they're funding, without specifically saying it is. But I think that's one of the big points of the fundraiser.
I use Kdenlive on a daily. I'm going to edit this meeting on Kdenlive because so far it hasn't caused me any issues. And yes, it has an issue that LinuxCast mentioned in his video, Matt. He mentioned that when you do a cut, and there's an audio in both ends of the cut, and you put both clips together, there's a certain like distortion that happens, a jump cut that happens in the audio. Easily avoidable, just a little bit of fade out on the beginning and a little bit fade in on the beginning of the other one. But they're fixing that. They're addressing it from what I saw.
It's not the best video editor I ever used. Personally, I don't use it anymore. I use DaVinci Resolve, which is not open source but has a Linux version, because it never crashes. I think in 2 years it crashed once on me.
Isn't it NVIDIA only?
It is NVIDIA only on Linux. Yeah, you can try to make it work with AMD GPUs, but you have to install the AMD GPU Pro drivers and OpenCL, and that. While this might enable you to run Resolve, this will also create a ton of other issues on other programs, so it's not worth it. I have high hope that with the Intel Arc GPUs, if they don't scrap the project entirely, they'll have good OpenCL support on Linux, and maybe these GPUs will also work with DaVinci Resolve. But for now, it's NVIDIA only.
This is a time where me as an NVIDIA only user can say yay on Linux. Because otherwise the nightmare.
And it's not an open source program, and the format compatibility on Linux isn't amazing with the free version, because you don't have H.264, so you're gonna have to use FFmpeg to convert a few things, and it only supports WAV audio, like I think it's a PCM16. So you have to do some conversion work if you don't grab the paid version, which is kind of expensive, but it's my business, so I paid for the paid version. I never have any format issues. I just cannot drag WebM videos on that thing, but everything else just works.
WebM are compressed videos, aren't they?
Yeah. So sometimes you go on a website, and for example, KDE or GNOME, when they have videos of their new stuff that they've been developing, often these videos are in WebM. So I just convert them using any other program, like Handbrake or something. It takes 2 seconds.
Yeah, there's Mystique as well as a converter. So it's a Qt-based app. Okay. And finally, for general use, what's your favorite app?
General productivity?
Yeah.
If it's a web browser, I'd say Firefox. But for like, let's say productivity, like writing stuff, preparing stuff, it's only Office. That's the Office suite I use, and I discovered it like pretty recently. I think it was a year ago or something. And I just install it everywhere. I have it on a server that is plugged into my Nextcloud, which means that I can work on all my documents from the cloud, from any computer, as long as I log in. And I just think it's great. It looks good. It's easy to use. It just works. And they're also a sponsor of the channel now. Since I started using them, they approached me after that. And yeah, I was like, I already use it. It's open source. Sure, give me money. I had already promoted them without getting any money. So it's like, if you want to pay me to keep doing what I already do for free, I'm good for it.
Here's when Office. I asked the productivity thing because I was expecting either LibreOffice or only Office, because there was recently an interview that Brody made with somebody a little bit up there. He's a fun, bubbly guy. He's got a bubbly personality. He's a writer by trade. So he mentioned that when it comes to novel writing, there's not a solution on Linux that works. Because he writes multiple thousands of words, so 500-page books. He mentioned when he reaches 20,000 words, I think, in all the Office suites that he tested on Linux, he tested multiple ones, including OnlyOffice, OpenOffice, LibreOffice, and all the others. And he even tried to do it via terminal. I was like, really? Who writes novels in terminal?
I wrote my novel with Emacs.
Yeah. So he tried everything, and they would crash after 20,000
yeah, that hasn't been my experience, because I wrote a novel. It's not published or anything, but I have like a 300-page book, and I wrote it on LibreOffice at the time, and I can open it on OnlyOffice and LibreOffice without any issues. It works.
I'm not saying his experience should be generalized.
No, of course not.
I was wondering why would he mention that when it's his he generalized it. He was like, he didn't, but in a way I felt he was generalizing. But he said, I tried everything. I have written 500-page books, tried to on all the Office suites on Linux, and they would crash after a hard limit of 20,000 words, I think, or not characters. So he went back to Windows, and he's using Office. So I was like, okay.
Yeah, I didn't encounter that, but that might be a hardware thing. Maybe he doesn't have like a super powerful computer. Maybe this issue is like smoothed out for me, because all of my laptops have at least 8 core CPUs. I don't know.
There's one thing he did mention, though, that made me rethink things. He was like, I'm using Office Online. So
it might be more the web browser that has an issue.
No, it's the Office Online is the one that's working for him. So
okay.
I think it's because it's the back-end cloud servers doing the hard work, not his local machine doing the work.
Yeah, so maybe he doesn't have that much RAM, or the CPU is just not super great. But there must be some optimization work to do here. If it works on Windows with Microsoft Office on the same hardware, then we probably have something to fix here.
Yeah, that's where I say I've had no issues with LibreOffice. I'm like the general public. I use what works. I don't use Office much. But I realized one thing recently with LibreOffice. Even if you set Flatpaks to use the system theme, if you use LibreOffice Flatpak version, the theme is going to be applied, but it's going to be very janky.
Yeah.
But if you use the regular package from the Arch repositories instead, still the theme will be janky, but less janky than the Flatpak version.
Yeah, because I think OnlyOffice has, LibreOffice has like 2 connectors for its interface. It has one for GTK and one for Qt. And maybe the Flatpak ships the GTK connector, which is then emulating the Qt theme on top of GTK, which is itself emulated by the interface. So you have some kind of double translation to try and mimic something that doesn't really work.
But LibreOffice should work on their dark theme, because there's a lot of elements in their dark theme where it's black on whatever dark theme.
Yeah, the contrast doesn't work at all. They have some issues, and that's also why I decided to move to OnlyOffice. The dark theme isn't dark; like it's more like something like GIMP or Audacity. It's deep gray, but they have perfect contrast. You can scale it; it scales correctly. And it just works for me. When LibreOffice, you open sometimes a side panel or preference window, and you have black text on gray background, and stuff that is not legible, icons that just become completely blurry or whatever, depending on the theme. It doesn't feel as polished, but if you use it with a tabbed interface, it looks kind of cool.
It looks a little bit like Microsoft Office,
Yeah.
but here's my question related to OnlyOffice. Does it have a Flatpak?
I think it does. I don't think it's official, but I think it does. Yes, I'm just gonna check, but I think I have it installed through Flatpak. Yeah, it's on FlatHub, but I'm not sure if it's an official one or not. The description doesn't say that it's not official, so generally that means it is. But
Let me check. OnlyOffice. Oh, OnlyOffice desktop editors. Oh, from the title, it's not official. From the title, you would tell because it's called OnlyOffice, and that's it. It should the title says OnlyOffice desktop editors. The whole sentencing is. Oops.
yeah, that's what OnlyOffice calls their thing, because they have the OnlyOffice cloud thing, which is
Yeah.
like, well, you just run it from the cloud on your own personal cloud, or you install your own server, whatever you want. And they have the desktop editors that you can download. So that's their wording, but
Yeah,
for Linux they have a deb, they have RPM, AppImage, Flatpak, and Snap. No, they have all the formats officially. Yeah,
they have Flatpak officially.
they have Flatpak, AppImage, Snap, Debian package, and RPM.
I wonder if from the title on the FlatHub is the official one, because if they have the Flatpak version on their website, doesn't necessarily mean the FlatHub version is.
Yeah, it might just be somebody else that packaged it, but they mentioned it on the website.
Because the title doesn't sound right. Desktop editors with a plural. And what version is it on their official website? Let me check.
I think it was 7.1.1.
OnlyOffice. Okay. Download. Where's their download link? Get OnlyOffice. Yeah. Okay. On personal. Okay. Oh, you have to sign in?
I don't think so.
Where do you click the download button on their website?
I went to Get OnlyOffice and OnlyOffice desktop and mobile apps.
1 second. Get.
In the big menu, you have Get OnlyOffice in the big menu up top, and then you have OnlyOffice desktop and mobile apps, and that's where you have all the links. And they all seem to be on the same version, 7.1.1.
Oh yeah, 7.1.1. Yeah, 7.1.1 for XP and Vista, Windows 10, and for Mac OS. Where's the Linux version?
If you scroll down, yes.
Yeah. They have the Flatpak 7.1.1, and it's on the GitHub. So they're not linking to the. They have the FlatHub. Yes. So basically, it's the official version. Just the title is kind of weird. It's very strange. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for my favorite apps are for media. It's basically Kden Live, same as you, and OBS. For listening to music, I don't listen to music, so let's skip that. I haven't listened to music in like 20 years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, 20 years. Because it's repetitive, listening to having music on a device and listening to the same thing over and over again. I would listen to a service where they have radio stations like Spotify. They have a radio where it's random music all the time. It's never repeating the same track. But when it comes to productivity, I use LibreOffice. And for gaming, and this is gonna make people hate me, but gaming on Linux should be banned, and gaming should be only made for Windows. This is how my brain works. Use games on something that works, where you don't have to rely on any extra layers or anything underneath. I do agree, though, when people say some games run better on Linux sometimes than they will ever run on Windows. I understand because Windows has a million services running in the background, specifically because I use Windows as it chips. I don't disable any telemetry. I don't disable anything because I have nothing to hide. I'm just a gamer. I'm just a Linux developer. That's what I talk about. So if they want to come at me, Microsoft. But I play games on Windows because I know I'll double click the game, it will run. Whereas on Linux, I'll be spending more time trying to trying to make the game run, having to Google around which commands I have to add to the launch, and if go hunting for it on the Steam DB and stuff like that. I don't want to waste time. I just want to be in my game. All that time I wasted to figure out if the game runs and how to get it running on Linux, I could have been already done with half the game on Windows.
Yeah, well, my approach is kind of different. It's like if there's a game that I like, I'll just look it up on ProtonDB for like 2 seconds. What's the rating? If it's gold or platinum, I buy it, I install it, I play it. There's nothing to do. If it's not that, I just accept that I can't play it because I use Linux and so it's not compatible. And so I won't play it because it's okay. I don't even have enough time to play the games I buy. So if I'm missing on something, it's okay.
And this is coming from a guy who only plays 3 games: Diablo series, Doom series, Quake series. That's it.
And so you would have like 0 configuration to do on Linux to make them run.
I know, but I'm still in the back of my mind, I'm still relying on something that could break on the background. So having this in the back of my mind,
like gaming on Linux might be like officialized thanks to Valve and the Steam Deck, SteamOS, Proton, etc. But it's still a stack of layers that depend on each other. Like you have Vulkan, you have DXVK or VKD3D, you have Proton or Wine, then you have Steam.
Too many layers.
And of course, at some point, something is going to break. And if you read the release notes for Proton GE, for example, you see Persona 5 Golden fixed again. Something fixed again because the latest update broke something, and so they refix it, and it re-breaks, and another game is fixed. And it's a game of cat and mouse because, of course, you're trying to make something run that it doesn't. It's not made to. So, yeah, there's going to be some issues, of course. But I think it's still a pretty fantastic experience nowadays. It's not, of course, it's not the Windows gaming experience, but it's still fantastic. And honestly, Linux has no right playing games as it does right now. Like, you've got 60% of the Steam catalog that is gold or platinum. It's absolutely incredible for something that developers have never wanted to do. I think it's good. But yeah, I can understand the fact that you don't want to base your gaming experience on a tilting pile of cards. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and relax, people. When I said should be banned, gaming on Linux should be banned, I was just kidding. It's a joke. I'm happy that it's happening. And the day will come where I will switch completely to Linux and even game on Linux. But I prefer to spend more time enjoying my game rather than having to hunt down if it works or it doesn't work. I don't want to go on SteamDB, look up which game, and I don't want to sacrifice any of my 3 types of games. And I know they run on Linux and they run well, but there's still those layers. Every update, this might break. This might, glibc as an example, breaking easy anti-cheat. Examples like that.
I think there are basically two use cases. If you play mostly single-player games, you're probably fine on Linux. The games don't break that often, and you're okay. But if you play multiplayer titles and you want to have the latest multiplayer game to play with your friends, then you do not go to Linux because, of course, the latest title will probably not support Linux at launch. It might now with the Steam Deck. Maybe they'll do something for anti-cheat or something, but you still cannot play Destiny 2, for example, because Bungie is just saying, no, we don't care. We don't want to support the Steam Deck. We don't want to support Linux. If you play using a Steam Deck or Linux, you'll be banned. And they just don't want it. And you have other titles who were like, yeah, it's just a file to put in our games files. We're going to do it. And if people want to enjoy it, cool, do it. But you don't know if when your friends decide to play a specific game that just came out, will it run on Linux or not? And if you don't have a Windows partition and you really rely on gaming to stay in touch with your friends, I don't think it's going to work for you.
Yeah, there are certain cases, like you said, where gaming on Windows is better than gaming on Linux. Specifically, multiplayer. I don't play multiplayer games because I live in Lebanon and my country relies on pirated games mostly. So multiplayer has not been a thing. There are some people who have the money to buy games on Steam, but this is maybe 0.00000000001%. So
Yeah,
it's a microscopic.
and me, I have no friends, so.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm joking. But my friends are not big into multiplayer. We basically only play like Total War, or they play Elden Ring or stuff like that. So
Yeah.
we just never play online, basically.
Speaking of the Steam Deck, I see you have two. I thought you had two. One review unit, the one that you ordered yourself.
No, I just have one. I decided not to buy the one I ordered because, well, I had the review unit. So since I didn't have to send it back, they generously gifted it to me after the review. So I just kept it, and I transferred my purchase option to a friend which wanted it.
Well, they gifted it to you, but they made the money through your videos.
Of course, they probably sold, even if they sold like 2 or 3 of them through my review, which wasn't overwhelmingly positive, I might add, because I didn't know that I was going to keep the deck. So I just made an honest review, fully expecting that I had to send it back like 3 or 4 days after. But yeah, if they only sold like 3 or 4 through my video, they made their money back, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you see the Steam Deck? Do you see a future where the Steam Deck, basically 2, which they all but confirmed in their new leaflets, do you see it handling AAA titles better, like 60 FPS and higher at some point?
I don't think so. I think the Steam Deck, as it is like, it's relatively expensive. It's affordable for what it does, but it's still an expensive product. It's like 400 euros, I think, in France, the base model, or 350.
You're talking about it when it exists with the Aya Neo, which is triple the price.
Yeah, of course. And so it is not that expensive, but it's still a lot of money for a lot of people. And I think that they're going to want to keep that entry level point. And that entry level point, as it is not a good experience for AAA titles. Like, as much as people are going to tell me that they play Horizon Zero Dawn at 40 FPS, no problems, and same for Cyberpunk, that's just not the case. Even on low details, with DLSS, with whatever, you're going to have like some frame drops, you're going to have some issues. Whether that's bothering you or not, that's a personal point, but you're going to have those issues. The Steam Deck right now cannot run all AAA titles at 60 FPS. It might happen in the future if developers optimize specifically for the deck, but if they don't, it's gonna stay at the point where Horizon, Cyberpunk, or The Witcher are. You cannot play them at 60 FPS in decent graphical conditions, even on a small screen. It just doesn't do that. What I think they might do is do a Steam Deck 2 and a Steam Deck 2 Pro, which might be like $600, $700, and maybe have a better APU and a bigger battery. And maybe that will be able to handle AAA titles better. Or they'll do a Steam console, which you plug into your TV. It's basically a PC, but that runs Steam OS with a new Steam controller too. And that will be like the premium experience for AAA titles. But I think the Steam Deck, as it is, will stay in that range of, it can play about anything, but the graphical details will vary from titles to titles. And it's not like a device you want to plug into your 4K TV and try to play games in 4K Ultra. It just doesn't do that. It cannot.
So, very true. And this is what I wanted to switch to that transition where I will talk about the way I see the Steam Deck is more as a portable retro gaming machine rather than a AAA gaming machine, because AAA titles on such a low powered device is practically impossible. And coming from PCs where you're playing the same title, like for let's say Horizon Zero Dawn, you're playing it at 100 plus FPS, and then you switch to your Steam Deck because I think now it supports cloud saving, so you can transfer your save to your Steam Deck.
Which also sucks, by the way, because it cloud saves your settings. So if you switch between your Steam Deck and your main PC, when you play on the PC, you're going to have the Steam Deck settings with terrible resolution and low details. You change that, and then you go back to the Steam Deck, and then the game is like 2 FPS on the deck because you have to redo your presets. Super annoying.
Super annoying. And I see it more as a retro gaming handheld, but the problem with retro gaming on those kind of devices is the legal aspect, because not everybody legally owns 25,000 different ROMs that they put on a 4 terabyte hard drive. So this will never also be feasible. Both scenarios are very hard to do. One is a legal one, and the other one is a performance one due to the. But there's something coming out soon. It's currently in beta. It's called Batocera, and I don't know if anybody knows about Batocera. But what Batocera is a Linux operating system on top of which there's something called Emulation Station, which has all the emulators that will help you run your favorite games. And with the Steam Deck being as powerful as it is, it will allow you to play up to PS2 games or PS3 in some cases, and Xbox 360, etc. So this is coming soon. I'm going to be showing it here to the users. The news just came out today. It's a video talking about the Batocera on the Steam Deck. Oh, I need to mute the video.
The games and the emulators.
Sorry. Yeah. See, it's showing there. He's showing the interface. It's superb. It is. I'll send you the link later on to watch. But it's what I always wanted in my hands. I used to have the Game Boy, the thing that looked like a Game Boy with a tiny little Game Boy 2-inch screen, and I was playing my PS1 games on a tiny screen like that. I was like, and I was playing them on the Raspberry Pi 3. And it wasn't powerful enough. So
you already have like tons of options if you want a let's say desktop emulator, because you can buy any mini PC and install a ton of stuff on it. But for portable, that can play from the Amiga Master System and NES up to Xbox 360 or at least PS2 and original Xbox, you don't have that in terms of portable power. At least not that I know of. You might have like some cases for Raspberry Pi that slots in, but it's not powerful enough for PS2.
Ever since the handheld gaming market exploded with the Aya Neo, with the other one, I forgot what, GPD, WinMax, and now the Steam Deck, this is changing. The whole landscape is changing. And having a device like the Steam Deck in my hands where I can play up to, I'm not going to have 20,000 ROMs on my device. Let's be realistic here. I'm not going to play maybe 2 or 3 of them. But having at least a dozen, let's say, this is realistic, have a dozen games from my favorite consoles growing up legally. Like, I have the discs, I have everything, because the consoles are long dead, but I have them sitting in the warehouse. Instead of them rotting to death, I can just rip them and legally rip them and put them on the Steam Deck and enjoy them again. There's a new life. It brings new life to my games. This I love, and the Steam Deck is powerful enough to give me a flawless experience, and that's what I always wanted. I like horizontal devices versus the vertical ones, like the Game Boy. I am a Game Gear generation
me
guy.
too.
I love the horizontal thing. You look at this, and you have the triggers and everything. You
play for 30 minutes, and then you have to change the batteries.
Yeah, I remember those days. I had AAA, and because my grandfather used to sell batteries for cameras, because he was a photographer. And back then, the cameras on batteries used AAA or AA batteries. So we used to have a lot of batteries. So I had a box of batteries right next to me with the Game Gear. Okay, low battery. But the problem is we didn't have save states back then.
Yeah. So when the battery's dead, your game is dead. So you rush to find the charger, because you could plug it in, if I remember correctly. You had a cable that you could plug it in through the wall. But I don't know if that worked if you had batteries, though. Did it switch to? I don't remember that. Did it switch to wall power when you plugged it in, or did it stick to the batteries? I'm not sure.
No, it used to stay. The older models, there was newer models that did switch, newer revisions, but I had the older revisions. So whenever I had batteries in my device and I plugged it in, it wouldn't do anything. I had to remove the batteries, so it switches to wall power. But I used to enjoy Sonic on that thing. And
it was so nice.
Yeah, and the
Just a
colors.
gorgeous screen for the day. Like you had
Yeah.
colors. You compare that to the Game Boys of the day, and like, why would you want a Game Boy? You can't even see it in the dark or anything. It's terrible.
And after that, I enjoyed the Game Boy Color, where I used to play, as everybody else, Pokemon. Hours and hours and hours and hours of fun. I look for that today, and I've been looking for that for a long time. But shelling €1,000+ for the Aya Neo just to get that's not going to happen.
No,
But
and
500.
when you look at the performance of the Aya Neo compared to the Steam Deck, it sometimes loses in most benchmarks. It's way more expensive, but it's not as powerful. Even the latest that they released, like I think it's the Air Pro or the Pro Air or whatever, it's not even as good, and it's like to 1,200 or something.
It's 1,200.
Crazy.
But the advantage of the Aya Neo Air over the Steam Deck is the AMOLED screen.
Yeah, that's what I really want to see on the next Steam Deck. It's a better display because it's washed out.
I think I will hold off for the next Steam Deck. That way I can put more money on the side. But if they have an AMOLED screen, I'm getting that. I'm not gonna, even if I have it in my bank account exactly the amount for the Steam Deck, I'm gonna zero my bank account for the Steam Deck because
I'd be surprised if we didn't see some aftermarket screens that are AMOLED and work with the Steam Deck. I'd be very surprised.
Here's where I am a hardware guy by trade. I do this for a living for computer desktops, not laptops, just desktops, because laptops are very finicky. I'd rather not you do them. But the Steam Deck, I'd rather not open it, even if I'd rather keep it in pristine state, keep it clean, keep it tidy. Never approach a screwdriver to it. I want to keep it as is.
I will admit, I never tried to open mine either. I didn't look inside. I saw the Valve disassembly guide. It doesn't look that complicated. Like removing the screen seems to be a super easy operation. You just heat up the glue and you lift it up and you unplug one ribbon cable. It seems to be super easy, but I didn't try it, so I cannot attest to that.
I'm never gonna try it. It's too finicky, too compressed together, and I love that thing. I don't want to.
In my opinion, it's an appliance. It's not like a laptop. I would open and upgrade and change things, or try some small repairs if I can. A desktop, no problem. But for me, the Steam Deck, yes, it's a computer in spirit, but it's an appliance, and an appliance I'm not opening. I'm bringing to a shop to repair. It's like my watch. I have the tools. I can open my watch and try to fix the movement. But that's not my job, and I'm going to break something. So if it's tiny, tightly packed, it's a work for professionals, not for me.
We agree on many things, and which brings me in line to this question, because we talked about it before recording again. We talked a lot before the recording. But since when did we start accepting 30 and 40 FPS as being the norm? I mean, PC, we came to so accustomed to 100 FPS. Going down to 30, 40 FPS, even 60, I see it, and accepting it, I see it as a total downgrade, like going from the same game, playing it at 100 FPS and continuing it on the Steam Deck at 30 or 40 after fixing the settings, of course. This, to me, is like jarring effect.
Yeah, and I think there are multiple factors to that, and I think I'm like the perfect example that represents all these factors. So first, I think the Steam Deck is more appealing to console users than PC users for a weird reason, because it runs your Steam games, and Steam is a PC player, not a console player. But I think it appeals more to people who like handhelds and consoles. If you have a super powerful PC and you have no interest in gaming on the go, then the Steam Deck doesn't work for you. So I think it's more appealing to console gamers, and console gamers are more tolerant to lower FPS. Like for the whole Xbox One and PS4 generation, you gamed at 30 FPS on these things. On Xbox 360, you were very often at 30, and on PS3, you were more at 25 or 24 often. And on previous generations, like you got at PS1, PS2, a lot of titles were between 20 and 30. They weren't even locked. They pushed the hardware far beyond what it was capable of. So I think console gamers are a little bit more tolerant. Nowadays, with the latest PS5 and Xbox Series X and whatever, yes, people do get those 60 FPS, but it's relatively recent. On the previous generations, they really did not get that. So I think there's that. And for me, at least, there's the experience of playing the game. And like I told you before we started recording, for me, playing on the Steam Deck feels like I interact with the game directly, which is like what a portable does. You're carrying the game. When I play on my PC or on a console, I have a distance between me and the game, which is like that extra layer of having a controller or a mouse and keyboard that separates me from the game. And my gaming PC is the same PC I use to edit videos. It's a Ryzen 7 5800H. It's 5800H. It's a 3070. It's 32 gigabytes of RAM. Very fast SSD. It's a really good PC. I can play most games at 60 FPS and more on my 1440p ultra wide display, whatever. But I never do because it just doesn't feel as good. Like playing Cyberpunk or Horizon on this PC feels hacky. It feels like I'm not interacting with the game. It feels like it's not supposed to be played on there, and I don't know. It just creates a disconnect, which I don't have on the Steam Deck. Which Steam Deck shouldn't be more immersive because it's smaller, it's lower resolution, lower details. But the fact that you interact with the device that runs the game makes you feel like you interact with the game itself. And for me, it's just more immersive. So I even started replaying Skyrim, which I only played on the Xbox. I think it was the Xbox One at the time, maybe the 360. And on the deck, it's just amazing. I'm playing on survival mode, and I'm just super immersed in the thing, and it's awesome. And I also play a lot more indie titles that I never played on my PC. Because again, playing like Hades on a mouse and keyboard on a giant screen just doesn't feel right. You're using like a computer that is far too powerful for the job on a screen that is too big to be focused on the thing you're trying to look at. For me, it doesn't work, but the Steam Deck is the perfect machine for these kind of indie titles. So I have I think a better connection with my games on the Steam Deck than on my PC, but probably it's because it's an appliance. It's designed to play games. There's no additional operating system layer that you interact with on top of it. There's no time to boot. You press a button and you resume your game as is, no problems. You don't have to boot it up, to install, to set up, grab your chair and grab your mouse and click your launcher. It just instant resume, instant play, and it feels like a console basically. And I think the experience is better for me. But I can understand people who would be like, I have this PC at home that can play the same game with better graphics, better performance, better texture detail, and just a better controller sometimes. So why would I bother? And I can understand that.
I agree with you to a certain extent. I agree with you that some games, to me, in my eyes, some games, it's worth playing better on a Steam Deck because you're more immersed into, especially RPG games. Yeah. RPG games, those are the type of titles I see that the Steam Deck works more than a PC, because on a PC, RPGs are not. You don't do a lot of movement. You don't. It's more interacting and looking into your inventory and powering up and talking to other characters. Yeah, but some titles like FPS for me, first-person shooters, it's better on a PC because you have enough room to move the mouse and whip the mouse. On a Steam Deck, you will never be able to flick the mouse and
absolutely. Any FPS that isn't Halo basically will play better on a keyboard and mouse than on a controller.
In some scenarios, the Steam Deck is a better experience. For me, specifically RPGs and MMORPGs and indie games. Also.
Yeah, I think racing titles will also play probably a lot better as well, because you just feel like you're doing the thing. But yeah, there are a ton of games that you will have a better experience on your PC, but it's a matter of personal preference, I think.
I would prefer to play, for example, Ace Combat on the Steam Deck rather than on the PC.
Yeah, because you feel like you can move more freely. You're not locked down in your chair,
so there are in short, there are a lot of cases where the Steam Deck is a much more immersive experience than the computer will ever be. Yes. At first, I saw it as it's only a retro gaming handheld. Then when I started watching your videos and you started painting a bigger picture, I started realizing that yes, RPGs and some games are I can, and especially that you show in your videos a lot of indie games. Yeah, indie games well, on a PC, useless. Big screen and everything. Especially, there is an indie game that I'm playing, and I don't know, I don't remember. Neon Drive, it's called.
Yeah.
It's for the Steam Deck. This,
Yeah.
in my eyes, was built for the Steam Deck.
Yeah, little stuff like Vampire Survivors and all,
Yeah.
and all the type of stuff like that, like Hades, like Twitch reflex things.
Yeah.
Like on the Steam Deck, they're perfect because you're super focused on a small display. Your eye catches everything. It's just better than playing on a giant display and just missing out on the corners of the action.
Yeah, and for me, I will hold off, like I said, to get the Steam Deck version 2. Hopefully, they put an AMOLED screen.
Yeah, that would be
But
nice.
if they put an AMOLED screen, that's gonna increase the price. That's for sure.
Yeah, unless they reuse the same APU, so that would mean they would release the Steam Deck 2 in like a year or two max, because after that it would
No,
be
that's-
weird to reuse the same APU. But
If they reuse the same APU, that's an iterative update.
yeah,
So it's a Steam
yeah, that
1.5.
would be like a Steam Deck Pro or Steam Deck Plus or whatever they call it, which has like
Yeah.
slightly better specs. And
Yeah, but I don't see them using a dedicated GPU, and that it wouldn't
No.
fit. It
no,
wouldn't
I don't
fit.
think so. Yeah, no, not even the laptop ARC GPUs would fit in there.
Have you seen? Because we're gonna get to a little bit of tense subject after that. But have you seen the Linus video where he slapped an external cooler?
That
and-
was hideous.
That
I know
was.
he did it for the meme, and like he's probably not going to use it like that forever, because that would make absolutely no sense. But yeah, it's fun. Like, it's fun. The guy slapped a giant cooler at the back of his thing, and yeah, it's weird. But fun.
Here's the thing that I liked though about his video, that he increased the capacity to 4 terabytes.
Yeah,
That I like.
that's a good thing. Yeah,
But opening it to do so, no. So I already decided what I'm going to do with my Steam Deck. I'm gonna, since I sell those in the store, I'm gonna slap a 2.5-inch SSD on the back, double-sided tape, not a strong one.
little
because I wanna keep
USB-C cable, and boom. Yeah.
USB-C cable, but here's the problem with the Steam Deck that everybody complains about. You only have one USB-C port.
Yeah.
You cannot charge it and have the SSD
Yeah, that's
connected
true.
at the same
Yeah,
time.
that's true. So you will have to have like a dongle taped to the back, which your USB drive would be plugged in, and then you still have one other USB-C port you could charge.
Yeah, it's going to be the dongle life back, like
Yeah, and you
Apple.
probably you're not going to split the data bus, because one's going to be, it's not the same pins for charging and data, I think. So that wouldn't degrade the performance of the SSD. But
No, but
yeah, I
have
stick to SD cards personally, because like the performance is almost exactly the same as the onboard SSD. So I'll just stick to SD cards in it. For now, I have like something, I think it's 32 gigabytes, but I'll probably buy like a 1 terabyte, then just slot that in there and call it a day.
I prefer having 4 terabyte SSD, or not
Yeah.
4 terabyte SSD, but a 2,
Wow.
3 terabyte SSD on the back, than relying on this SD card, remove this SD card, or re-put this SD card.
Yeah, I would only have one and just manage the installed games. Like right now,
Yeah.
I need to buy a bigger one, because like the 32 gigs is just completely full with indie titles, and then the base storage is full with one game. So
Yeah, that's the one of the problems with the Steam Deck. But would you use? I prefer to use external NVMe's in an enclosure rather than 2.5 inches, because they're quicker. But how quicker could it be via the USB-C port? You got to check that. Nobody has made the difference.
yeah, it's not Thunderbolt. It's regular USB-C. So I don't know that you would be getting the same speeds as an M.2 PCIe M.2 drive.
Yeah,
I don't
there's
think
no
so.
benefit there. But
Yeah.
speaking of which, do you? I keep forget. The question comes to my brain and then it keeps skipping again. Do you have you ever used a Steam Deck on a dock or connected to the TV or?
I did that for the reviews I made, like to explain how it works as a PC, like using KDE on it, etc. But on a TV, I have a 4K TV. If I put a 720p game in there, it's
Yeah.
going to look disgusting. And if I upscale it if I use it in 4K, the Steam Deck is not going to be able to run it. So I really don't understand this use case at all, because the Steam Deck plugged into a TV, even with DLSS or FSR, 720p to 4K, you're gonna see it. Even 4 meters, you're gonna see it's gonna be blurry. It just doesn't look good. So I wouldn't do that on a 1080p TV, maybe, but on a 4K TV, no. I just wouldn't do it at all. And as a PC, I don't think the Steam Deck is a good PC for now. Like, you could do it if you really want to if you don't only have the money for one device and you absolutely want something that does gaming first, but can be a PC on the side, then okay, Steam Deck, why not? You buy a dock, you buy a display, it can work, but it's not a good PC.
Okay, that was the question that was...
You cannot use it while you're moving around, because you're going to have to carry like a USB-C keyboard or a Bluetooth keyboard on your lap, plus the deck with some kind of thing to mount it upwards. It has a super tiny screen. And using KDE with the touchpads is just a mess. It can be done, but it's super slow and it's not practical at all.
That was the question that was skipping my brain. Do you agree with all those videos that say, I edited this video on the Steam Deck, I did this video on the Steam Deck, I did all this on the Steam Deck?
If you like doing that, more power to you. It's cool. Like, sure, hey, you have that device. He's able to do it. But if you have another PC that can do it better, why do you do it on the Steam Deck? I wouldn't edit my videos on the Steam Deck. Like, why would I do that? I have a device that does it better. If I only had a Steam Deck and wanted to edit videos, then sure, I would try it.
And it would slim the timeline of Kdenlive or whatever video editor you're using to this big. You would be constantly scrolling and
exactly. It's too small. And if you plug it into a display, like if you have a dock, that it's your workstation. You use your Steam Deck during the day, you play, and when you get home, you slap the Steam Deck on a dock and you use it as a PC. Sure, it's not a very good PC because it's not as powerful as any desktop you might find. And it's not a good laptop because you need all those peripherals to use it comfortably, but it can be done. And if people have fun with that, then sure, that's cool. But I wouldn't do it.
And last question before we get to the heated topics is, what do you think about the dual boot aspect of it? You can dual boot any distro on it.
Well, for now, I don't think you can dual boot on the Steam Deck. I think you can just base SteamOS and then, well, at least you cannot dual boot SteamOS and something else, I think. But you might be able to install another distro and then install a second one.
Maybe because
maybe that's changed. Maybe that's changed.
In the Batocera video, they and in one of Linus's videos, they installed a separate operating system on an SD card and they booted that instead of SteamOS.
Maybe they fixed that because I think when they released it, you could not dual boot. It did not support that because it didn't have a BIOS interface you could access to select a boot device or whatever.
Maybe, but I don't know how they're doing it.
I haven't been followed that side of the things on the Steam Deck.
They don't show how they're dual booting. They just show the other operating system running, and they tell you we opted to use it on an SD card without wiping the SteamOS. So
so that might be a way now to force it into booting from the SD card instead of the hard drive.
All right, are you ready for the heated round?
Depends on what it is.
Okay, I call it a bit of reality check. We are both Linux ambassadors, so in one way or the other, trying to push people to start using and adopting Linux as much as we can. But I don't see, for myself, I don't see that gaming alone being the thing that will help it grow. It's hardware support. It's the hardware support and adoption that will. It's like Linux's Achilles heel right now, as I see it, is hardware support more than user adoption. What's hurting user adoption is hardware support. Users, like I said earlier, users with a $2,000 gaming machine, they're not going to throw that in the cupboard or in storage to go buy a hardware specifically tailored to Linux. So they just won't adopt Linux until Linux supports their hardware, specific hardware. What do you think on the subject?
Well, I agree. Like, I think gaming on Linux as a thing, like you install Linux to install your own programs and game, this has no chance of helping Linux at all, because you still have that initial block, which is you have to install Linux and it has to work. Before you start installing Steam and Heroic and Proton G and whatever, you have to install Linux, and if it doesn't work, you're not going to go to these other steps. So for me, gaming on Linux will only help Linux through SteamOS or Steam being pre-installed, or SteamOS or any other gaming distro basically, but probably SteamOS has the best chance of that, being pre-installed on devices sold directly to consumers. So if tomorrow, like, I don't know, ROG or any other gaming-focused company, Origin PC or whatever, decides to ship a PC that runs SteamOS out of the box and sell it directly to consumers, it's available in retail stores, it's available online, then yes, this can help Linux grow, because people will have, like, you have the Steam Deck experience, but on your PC or on your gaming console or on this device that is made specifically for gaming. And I think this can help. But apart from that, it is, I wouldn't say necessarily hardware support, I would say hardware availability. Like, to grow faster, you need to have Linux computers that run Linux out of the box in shops. Like, you go into a Walmart in the US and you have PCs that run Linux that you can get out of the store with the PC under your arm. This needs to happen. Until this happens, there will be no progress, because hardware support will come from manufacturers pre-installing Linux, discovering issues, and fixing them by contributing. That's how the hardware support happens. A community cannot support all hardware devices by itself. Windows does not write the drivers themselves. The manufacturers write the drivers for Windows. We have done an awesome job. Well, I never wrote a driver in my life, but the people who contribute to the Linux kernel and Mesa drivers and Nouveau and whatever, they're doing an amazing job, but they cannot possibly support everything. Driver work has to come from the manufacturers, and this will never happen until manufacturers decide that they want to sell devices with Linux to a wide range of people. Because for the manufacturer, hardware support isn't a problem. They will contribute and develop the drivers and work with the original manufacturer of the Wi-Fi chip, Bluetooth chip, fingerprint reader, saying, okay, we're going to buy like 10,000 pieces of this thing to create 10,000 PCs, but you have to give us something to write the driver for Linux support. And the manufacturer is going to be like, how much is that? Like $1 million? Okay, we can work on the driver. And that solves the issue. But it's hardware availability that enables hardware support and that enables adoption afterwards.
It's all by extension. But the problem with hardware manufacturers, the hardware manufacturers, is they get paid mainly by Microsoft and Apple. So this is where their money is. So they're not going to go to a place where, oh, it's open source, so it's free and there's no money coming in.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a hard time.
It would be something like Dell or HP or like a big one that already has contracts with these guys and who says, okay, well, like the HP Dev One or like Lenovo has some laptops that they sell with Fedora, and I think Dell has some laptops with Ubuntu, the XPS line, and just put those in stores. And once you start selling them to people, because I think a lot of people seeing a different OS would be interested or intrigued, as long as the sales personnel is kind of at least a little bit informed about those and doesn't say, don't use that, use Windows, because my commission, if I sell you a Windows laptop, is bigger. But yeah, there would have to be training and equity between the devices. But you see the same laptop, it's like 50 or 100 euros cheaper. And it runs a system you don't know, but it looks cool. Like if you look at Ubuntu compared to Windows, it looks kind of nice. If you look at AD, even the default one compared to Windows, it looks kind of cool. So maybe you're intrigued and maybe you buy this one because it's going to do basically everything that you need to do, honestly. If you want to browse the web, to write a document, to exchange emails, you don't need Windows specifically. You can do that on Linux, no problem.
But here's where the fragmentation comes in. The fragmentation issue comes in.
Which distro do you ship? Yeah.
Which distro do you ship on the hardware? And if the user decided to switch distros and decided, I don't want to use this distro. I don't want to use Ubuntu-based or Debian-based distros. I want to switch to Arch. I want to switch to Fedora. So the manufacturers have now the problem of creating drivers to work on X amount of distros.
Yeah, because they need to make the drivers like work from the Linux kernel. If they start shipping like Ubuntu plus their own little tweaks and customizations and things, but then you install Fedora and it doesn't work, that defeats the purpose entirely. All their contributions and all the hardware supports need to be like open source or at least upstream into a module that you can install from anywhere.
Here's a situation where I was surprised by Linux enthusiasts. I have a keyboard from 2006. It's the original G15. I'm going to show it now to the users. You can see it on your end. It's called Logitech G15 2006. I think 2008 or 2006. Yeah. No, 2006, not 2008. Yeah, that one. I'm going to show it to the users once I have an image up. Yeah, that one. Okay, view image. Open image in new tab. Where is it? Image in new tab. Oh, it's a small image. No. No, I need a bigger image. Let me see. Open image in new tab. Why are they so small? Okay, I'm gonna set to large. Oh, Google. Tools. Okay, tools, size large. Okay. Oh, that's the one. Open image in new tab. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, switch. All right. So I'm showing the users that one. I'm going to send it to you on Jitsi. Copy image link. Where's the chat? Where's the Jitsi chat? Oh, here. Paste. Hey, I sent it to chat. You can check it out. That's the original G15 keyboard.
That's huge.
It is huge. I have three of them. Actually, I have two of them and one G11. G11 is minus the LCD screen. But that driver on Windows no longer works.
Yeah.
On Windows, its native OS no longer works because they updated it to a later revision where the LCD had color and it was smaller. It was a 10 key. I think it was a 10 keyless version, but this specific one is dead, officially dead on the Windows side of things. But someone on the AUR backported the driver to Linux.
Nice.
And I'm running it with the LCD screen fully functional. I have the date, the time, the CPU usage, the RAM usage.
All the keys are recognized. Everything works.
Everything works except the lights. But the lights, I just have the static lights on all the time. But they're dying because hardware is aging. But the G keys work. That's the important part.
Yeah.
But good luck programming the G keys via terminal. Yeah. It's very complex. So I didn't do it. I didn't bother with it. I don't use G keys on Linux anyway. But the best part is the LCD screen even works in games. I have my health bar, my ammunition.
That's so cool.
On the LCD screen in Linux. Whereas on Windows, it's dead. It's officially killed off by Logitech. But I love that keyboard. It's a weird keyboard with sticky keys. As they age, they get more and more sticky because they're membrane keys. They're not the...
Yeah, so the membrane must be degrading and starting to glue a little bit.
Yeah, and they're stuck to the board. Good luck removing them from the board, from the PCB. But I love that keyboard, and I keep using it in the store. I don't use it here. Here I have an ROG Strix keyboard. I'm on a higher level of it. But the problem is that this ROG keyboard is not supported by OpenRGB. I don't know why. My motherboard, my RAM, my graphics card are supported by OpenRGB, but not my keyboard. Very odd. But that keyboard I want to keep using for the future, for the foreseeable future in the store. But the community, the Linux community, is showing, like you said, there are some contributors to the hardware that help hardware support increase.
Yeah.
This is a prime example of that. It's dead on Windows, but it's alive on Linux. So I will adopt any desktop that has that keyboard. But The problem is stores are not selling on the shelves desktops. We are seeing laptop adoption, hardware adoption more than desktops. That's another problem.
Yeah, because
not every
desktops on Linux, like we're probably never gonna have any issues, except maybe like the Wi-Fi chip or the Bluetooth chip. But everything else is maybe the RGB. But even NVIDIA, if you only have that graphics card, there's like no problem. It's a one-click install, and there's no issues. NVIDIA is problematic on hybrid devices, but when your only GPU is NVIDIA, as long as you stick to x.org, you're not gonna have many problems.
You said the magic word. As long as you stick to x.org.
Yeah. On Wayland, it's usable now, but it's not perfect. Like there are tons of small little problems here and there. But at least now you can use it. Like it's actually displaying something, but it's not great. Yeah.
It's getting there. Like Wayland, Wayland is. And speaking of Wayland, the other day I haven't been able to log into a Wayland session since the beginning. On KDE Arch KDE, because I'll go into why I'm saying Arch specifically. On Arch KDE, I cannot log into Wayland. It keeps kicking me back out to SDDM.
With an NVIDIA GPU?
Yeah. I have the 1080, so it keeps throwing me back to SDDM. So I told my users on my distro, I will not be shipping Wayland by default on my distro because number one, I cannot use it to provide support.
You can't test it. So
if you have an AMD GPU and really want to use it, there's a button in my tool. You click it, it will reinstall all the packages and re-enable the Wayland session, and you can log into it. But this is the problem. Like if you have NVIDIA, there's only a finite amount of distributions you can distribute on your desktops, basically. NVIDIA is okay because you have the NVENC encoder. This is ultimately the thing that sells it for people. And now NVIDIA with the 40 series, they even have Intel's AV1 codec
as well. Yeah.
So this is a kick in the nuts for Intel.
Honestly, like there are rumors that Intel will abandon their GPUs after the second generation that they planned, and if they don't sell the first generation well, I think they will, because like all the advantages that they bring are already done with competitors that are already ready to sell and ship them, when Intel is still trying to scramble to release something. And the driver support for Intel seems atrocious, even on Windows. Like if you play any game earlier than DirectX 12, the performance is shit compared to anything that you could find today. So there's no advantage at all using an Intel chip or an Intel GPU. As soon as you can have an RTX 40 series, Intel is dead.
And knowing that Ryan Shrout is switched to Intel, and now he's in the GPU department with Tom Peterson, and I used to talk to Ryan Shrout a lot. When he used to be at PC Per. He's a good guy, but he's playing a losing battle right now.
Yeah, I think he might have bet on the wrong horse. Yeah.
And Tom Peterson being the guy behind G-Sync. Also, he's like, okay, I have gifts to give, but I cannot give them because Intel is not making it possible.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's gonna be weird. It's gonna be a very bumpy ride for Intel
I think they really have to be willing to stick with it for like pure sunk cost fallacy. Accept it. Like it might be a fallacy, but accept it. Like stick with it for like 5 years. For just let some time brew to show people that your hardware is improving, that your drivers are improving, and then yes, manufacturers will ship like hybrid XE plus ARC devices, and then you're good to go. But you have to really stick to it and just grab onto the thing and wait for it.
The thing they have to their advantage, though, in the Linux world is that their drivers, and they always open source their drivers, and they're handled by the kernel very well. So basically what I do for XeroLinux is for any Intel, because there's a lot of users on lower end hardware that only have Intel as a GPU or desktops. So for that, I'm using the Mesa driver. I'm not using Intel specific driver because
Mesa works perfectly.
Mesa integrates the Intel drivers way better than Intel the specific the XF86 Intel GPU have done so far. So I shipped Mesa for users that only have Intel. I tell them, you don't have to install anything. It's already shipped out of the box. So Intel has that to their advantage in the Linux world. So if you really want a laptop for general use for writing and everything, just get it with a single GPU, Intel GPU, and that's it.
Yeah,
you're done.
absolutely. I think for like hybrid devices, like with a dedicated GPU and integrated GPU, Intel would be a super good proposition on Linux compared to Intel plus NVIDIA. Like the driver integration will absolutely be better with Intel drivers than with Intel plus proprietary NVIDIA trying to switch profiles and whatever.
And Intel's Xe graphics have come a long way.
Yeah, they're kind of nice now.
They can handle indie games no problems. Some older AAA games, like I'm talking, like I don't know if you remember a game called Blood Vengeance, Revengeance. It was a beautiful game. That was the first game that had really realistic water in it. It was back in 2002, 2003. It was an amazing game. You should check it out.
Yeah,
it's a third person game, and it's now available on Steam. This is before Steam was really big. I love that game, but this game runs on Intel integrated graphics at highest settings, no problem, because the highest resolution you can set that game was 1280 by 1024.
Diablo 2 style with the extension.
Speaking of which, I finished Diablo 2, the remake, remastered. I finished it on Linux. So
yeah, I only played it on Linux. Yeah, it works
wonderful.
beautifully. Basically, Blizzard titles, they're plug and play. Like you install Battle.net, you click
minus
install,
Overwatch.
you run the game, you're done. Yeah.
Minus Overwatch.
Overwatch I never tried. Yeah, because there's got to be an anti-cheat somewhere or something.
Yeah, it has an anti-cheat. But other than that, Diablo was. I enjoyed the experience on Linux with Diablo.
Even Diablo 3, when it released, I played it on Linux at the time, and it ran beautifully.
This one I finished on Windows.
But I didn't like the game, but it ran well.
Don't say that in front of me. I've been playing Diablo since Diablo 1 ever launched.
Oh yeah, but I love Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, but for me, Diablo 3
Lord of
was
Destruction,
a big mistake in terms of structure. But that's just my opinion.
Diablo 1 Hellfire, yeah, and Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction and all that. But So, but I am going to say one thing that's going to get people come at me with pitchforks right now. In my mind, if I look at it from the broad perspective, I don't see Linux is really ready yet for on the desktop front. I'm not talking about the server front. The server front, it's already there and everything, but for us users that require it for production, like if you want to do audio editing, professional audio editing and professional rendering for a studio or for a company or whatever, it's not ready yet because there's a lot of still hardware adoption issues. You got stability issues here and there, because in these cases, the cases I'm talking about is downtime equals not acceptable. A second of downtime is not acceptable, then don't use Linux. It's not ready yet in that aspect. In the broad aspect where 1 single second of downtime is not acceptable, then Linux is not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the counter example because like I run my channel entirely on Linux. I have this Fedora installed on my desktop. I think it's been like a year or something, maybe more than a year. And I run DaVinci Resolve. I run like Audacity for audio production, whatever. I never have been unable to, I haven't been unable to boot my laptop or to do my work since I installed Fedora. The stability has been perfect. Everything's been perfect. But that's a desktop. That's a desktop I bought from a company that makes desktops that run with Linux. It's from Slimbook. So it's been tested exclusively with Linux. I don't even think they tested it with Windows at all. And so I know that, the hardware is there, the software is there because I picked the distro that I knew would be stable and run. And so there is no downtime. But you cannot ask a professional studio to change all their devices and all their software and just bin all their old projects and effects and custom transitions and rendering engines and whatever to say, now you can move to Linux because it's going to work if you buy a desktop from manufacturer X, and if you use this distro specifically, and if you move to DaVinci Resolve instead of using Adobe. And no one's going to do that. No. I think if you had Adobe Premiere and Photoshop and whatever running on it, there would be no issue. Basically, studios could move to it. But without these things, you're never convincing a professional to bin all their tools that they've been paying and learning for like 50, 30, 20 years. No one's going to do that.
Yeah, this is another problem. Like Adobe. If Adobe came to Linux, Linux is going to Linux adoption is going to jump by like quite a high peak.
Probably more than if Microsoft Office came to Linux, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. There's my best friend right next door. He uses After Effects, and he said Windows, when it comes to After Effects, Windows is not the best platform because there's no multi-CPU, multi-threaded support on Adobe products yet, and they've been promising it for over 10 years.
Yeah,
so
and they've been doing it on Mac.
They've been doing it on Mac, but
on
Windows. But on Windows, good luck. But if they come with multi-threaded support on Linux, the spike, we're going to see a huge spike in Linux adoption. But they're not going to do that because relearning and how to update the system
and Adobe has like the oldest, spaghettiest code ever on their software. Like it's the same base for the program. They haven't been rewritten since like 20 years when they introduced them, or 30 years. And well, porting that to Linux, they would have to rewrite the entire thing from scratch. There's no way they can keep a single line of code from this thing. So I don't see them doing that for a market that probably feels way too small for them.
Being a George Lucas fanboy, I love George Lucas, and the fact that he's trying to cancel the Kathleen Kennedy trilogy and all that crap.
That would be nice.
He's canceling. He's working on it. He's making his own.
Really?
He's working on his own story, because when George Lucas handed over Lucas Studios to Disney, he was already he had already a draft for the first of the new trilogy. So they signed on the condition that they will shoot the movies as he has written them. But they stab him in the back with and they do a whole different story.
Big time, yeah. They did like I don't know what. I have no words for what they did to Star Wars.
Yeah, he's doing it now. He's working on his trilogy, and he's going to cancel Kathleen Kennedy by saying that everything she did is non-canon. So
that would be so fun.
Yeah, he's having fun right now because he's getting old.
And honestly, I think Disney should jump on the occasion, because they're gonna make a boatload of money with that. More merch, more stuff, figurines and DVDs and video games. Like they could say, okay, you know what? Alternate universe, and boom, let's go. Just like Marvel, no problem. Yeah,
but they don't like to be canceled, so
no.
That's gonna be a hell of a war. But the reason I mentioned George Lucas, because George Lucas internally, all the software at LucasArts that they use to create their games, to create their effects at Industrial Light and Magic, is based on Unix.
Yeah.
And they've been using the Silicon graphics-based systems internally and building their software on that. And now, by extension, they're using Linux. So, and I own one of the. I don't know if you remember Silicon Graphics.
Yeah, your SGI computers.
We have one. I have it in the store collecting dust.
Yeah,
we bought it for $30,000, but now it's worth $1.
Yeah, well, it's a piece of history, but you wouldn't use it today to do something.
It's got the world's very first, CRT, but flat Trinitron CRT with the OLED type color spectrum, because it's a professional monitor in the end. But it's got one of the world's first. So we have it, but we lost the connector. We wanted to use it on one of our computers, but the connector cost $200 because it's a collectible. It's RGB. It's RGB each. The R separately, the G separately, and the B separately.
Yeah, it's a composite cable.
It's a composite cable. It's hard to find, but yeah, I still own that thing, and it's sitting in my store. But on a lighter note, we're gonna go back to have fun before we close. 2 more questions. We've been going on for 2 hours, so yeah, it's about time. Rising. What do you think? If I remember correctly, you made a video replying to some requests by myself and others, showing us your config. Do you still bother with it? If so, what do you use, like extensions, themes on KDE or anything else?
I don't really nowadays. I use stuff as default. When I use KDE, I do change the layout because like the default is a little bit too Windows-like. I don't find it super efficient, so I tend to tweak it. But the default GNOME layout, like the only extensions I have is night theme switcher to switch from dark mode to light mode depending on the time of day. I have a GS Connect for KDE Connect on my phone, and I have a third one which is Blur My Shell. Yeah, that just replaces the gray background that is not super nice with your blurred background instead. But that's it. The rest is just pure stock GNOME and nothing changed. I use the Advaita theme, the dark theme most of the time. And on KDE, I use the Breeze theme, generally the dark one, and an accent color. I generally don't bother rising anymore. Sometimes I do it just for fun. Like when I know I'm going to erase one of my laptops, that's basically my test laptops. Sometimes I try like stupid, crazy stuff. I install all the extensions that I never got to try, or install all the plasmoids and weird things that I want. And I do something that looks completely ugly and disgusting. And then I'm like, okay, anyway, I need to wipe this out in 2 hours. So let's go now. Let's erase it. But for my own experience, I don't find much pleasure in it anymore. Like I know if I installed KDE on my desktop to replace GNOME, I would probably change it a little bit, but not much in terms of theme, just a layout, basically.
I am a riser mainly. I have created some risers that I share with people that really want to apply it on KDE, because since it's a KDE riser than anything else, it should work on any distro, but you have to replace the package manager, of course, because I use Pacman since it's for Arch, but you can replace it with apt-get and whatnot. But the theme I've been using for a whole year on XeroLinux was because of your video.
How was it called?
The lay-in theme.
Yeah, it's really cool. I like it.
It's the best theme I've seen, bar none. And the developer of that theme created Fluent. He created other themes, but none of the level of lay-in. But the problem with the AUR package, they cannot understand it either. I talked to them. They were like, "It should work, but why isn't it working?" And it's been a month, and they still can't figure out what the issue is, because I have to rely on the AUR package to include it on the ISO. But if you install it their way, just by git cloning and running the install script, it works just fine.
But if you install the package from the AUR, it doesn't work.
It works somewhat. It's broken. Like for the KDE panel, instead of having slightly rounded corner edges, it has rectangular edges, and it's not translucent. So no translucency there. So it's kind of weird. In some places it works, in others it doesn't work. They cannot explain it, so I'm waiting for them to figure it out. But other than that, GTK theme and everything else works just fine. And I've been using it ever since I started shipping XeroLinux, and it's mainly because of your video. I've seen it, and I was like, and the way you rised your KDE when you used to do so, very well done. Very well done.
It was just a procedural process, basically, because I always liked like having a global menu on top, and I think when you have a global menu, what works best is a dock. So basically, like kind of the Mac OS way of doing things, basically, with a few tweaks here and there. So I did that with the default KDE theme, and I just got bored of Breeze, and I looked for something else, and I just happened upon like this one, which is a Quantum theme. I think it's not a default KDE theme. You need Quantum to
no, Quantum is for the transparency only. But
okay, you can use it without it, maybe.
You can use it.
Well, I used it through Quantum, and I was like, damn, that looks super good. And there were a few apps that just had small issues here and there, but basically, it's still pretty good for a full KDE theme that does transparency and panels. And I never found one that was as advanced in terms of how nice it looked on every app.
That's the problem with theming on KDE right now. Is you don't find a lot of complete themes, like a theme that themes that has a GTK theme, that has an SDDM theme, that has a KDE theme, had a latte theme, layout, a Kvantum, everything, like as a complete entity. You can count them on a single.
Yeah, and out of those 5, 2 are macOS imitations.
Yeah. If you use the layout, yeah, but it's before we switch to the last question, which is going to be a bit difficult one, the latte panel losing its main developer. I thought of dropping it because no more development. Why ship it? It's gonna break. But I went to the GitHub since I use GitHub a lot. I saw that it's not really dead. It's receiving community support now.
Oh,
it's receiving because I use the Git version, because the developer himself said if you are using Plasma 525 onwards, do not use the stable version.
Yeah.
Wait for the 0.11.
Yeah.
And then he called it quits before 0.11.
Yeah, he decided I'm not going to release it because I cannot support it. So
yeah. So I'm using the
those
Git
community
version.
contributions. They're still getting merged. So there's still someone who handles the repo then.
Someone from the KDE department.
Nice. Okay.
Because when I did the interview with Nicolo, he said they are going to adopt it. It's just a matter of time.
That's nice.
So, because it's part of KDE, you cannot
of course.
break it out.
I think honestly, like maybe one KDE user out of 3 uses it. So
yeah, exactly. So I decided to keep it around for a while longer because I tried Ksmooth doc, didn't work.
they're not as good.
It's not. You click on an icon, you have to click it 2-3 times before it responds. Tried Plank.
No.
Plank hasn't been maintained in years.
Yeah, too basic.
And tried another one called CairoDoc.
Yeah,
that hasn't been maintained in 15 years.
That was something I used on my GNOME 2 Ubuntu desktop back in the day.
It was really customizable, but now it's all kinds of broken.
It's outdated.
So LatteDoc was the only choice. This is the kind of situations where you have to be picky on the theme you use out of the box. For example, Manjaro ships Breeze. That's it.
Yeah.
They don't bother.
Yeah, you just change the color.
I decided to go a little bit beyond and use a theme that works. And by seeing your video, I was like, damn, that desktop looks sexy. What theme were you using? And you didn't mention which theme you were using. So I asked people around which purple theme looks like.
I think all the links were in the description. I think I added that.
I don't look at descriptions. Because especially today where
you only have like the 2 first lines and you have to click on the arrow to enroll it.
And now it's like incomplete sentence. So
it's weird. I don't know what they're doing with the
exactly. So I was like, I sent a screenshot to someone. They were like, hey, that's a Leyen theme. I was like, okay, I used it and I've been in love with it ever since. Now to the last question, because that's a hard one. I'm going to talk security. Recently, you made a video about Manifest v3.
Yeah.
And how Google is killing our ad blockers, trackers, among others. Also, with the recent hike in the number of malware targeting our beloved Linux, do you think it's the nature of the beast as an OS grows in popularity, it will grow higher on the attacker's radar? Is it in Linux interest to surge in popularity in that case?
I think it's inevitable. Like, if your OS gets popular, it's gonna get targeted. Like Linux is already like targeted a lot, but on the server side. So the attack vectors are mostly packages that are used on servers. They try to attack the Apache server. They try to attack like SQL databases and stuff like that. But there are no specific attacks that not many, that try to target packages specific to the desktop. You don't have GNOME as an attack vector. You have sudo, but if you only use graphical stuff, there are not many things that are going to try and target you. That will happen. And if Linux gets more popular, like for example, if the Steam Deck sells, 15 million, I wouldn't be surprised if people try to have like weird tutorials to get a Trojan inside of your Steam Deck and grab some information, your credit card from Steam or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised. Just a simple keyloggers, stupid stuff like that. Stuff that doesn't really make it to Linux these days, or at least not the Linux desktop. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. But I don't think it's a reason to try to keep Linux desktop as little used as it is. Just because you might get targeted more or attacked more doesn't mean you should be, we're going to keep it super small and exactly like it is because we don't want any attacks. Windows users manage to get defenses against that. Like even nowadays, like Windows Defender is actually not bad. On Windows, I wouldn't install another antivirus than that. So if at some point we have to have an antivirus on Linux, well, honestly, if you exchange files with someone on Windows, you should probably already have an antivirus to protect them. If you download some weird PDFs and documents online and you pass them to your Windows friend, if you haven't checked them through an antivirus, you're probably an attack vector for them, honestly. So
for them, not for us.
Unless you open it with a Wine program, which can absolutely access your home folder and your documents and everything, because Wine has access to your home folder. So that's why you should use bottles and not just install Wine like it is. But if you install, like I had someone on my Discord server who did that. Like they installed Wine and they tried a ransomware just to see if it worked, and it worked. Every single thing in his own folder was encrypted. He couldn't open it on Linux at all. He tried that on VM. He didn't try it on his main computer.
But what you're saying is Windows-based viruses can attack Linux through Wine.
Wine, at least. And so this means that the Steam Deck, for example, might also end up being a vector, or gaming on Linux might end up being a vector. If people like distribute pirated copies of games with Trojans, you run them with Wine or Proton, you could get infected through that as well. If you run a pirated copy, you didn't really check it yourself, there might be a Trojan inside of the cracked exe. You might get infected through that. It can already happen. So
that's why Wine bottles is
bottles is good because it's at least going to containerize this thing, and I don't think it's going to be able to access your full home directory. I need to check that, but I don't think they can.
No, they can't, because what's it called? What's the name of the game? Whatever. A pirated game that I wanted to play. I ran it through bottles because I'm an experienced user. I know that pirated games, 99% of the time, the cracked exe contains some sort of malicious code. This is how they make their own money, because they say, how do people who distribute pirated games make their money? That's how. They have access to your computers, and they can run your computers to mine, for example. So I wanted to play this game, and it's pirated because I couldn't afford the official one. So I ran it through bottles. I was like, hey, it runs. And it won't affect my system. It will break the bottle if anything. I'll just delete the bottle and I'm done with it. So so it's if you want to run something pirated or something you suspect has anything that runs on Windows, use it in bottles, because bottles is not only for gaming. You can run any Windows application through bottles. So please be careful. And there's one last comment I wanted to mention. Are you have you been in your life as a multi-OS user for a long period of time? Like you used Windows, Mac, and Linux at the same time, or you just switched from Windows to Linux and you haven't looked too far around?
Yeah, when I started using Linux, I just completely wiped out Windows. I just used Linux because, well, I wasn't gaming much and I had a crappy laptop that really couldn't game either. So at the time, like Linux gaming in 2006, you could not do it. It didn't exist. Like you had Wine, but it didn't run anything. Like so, you could not game on Linux in 2006. Not really. So I used Linux exclusively, and that worked for me. When I stopped using Linux, when I just didn't have a computer anymore, I only used Windows at work. Then I moved to a Mac at work. And then I switched from Mac to Linux. So I only ever had one OS at the same time. I don't dual boot at all. I never really dual booted either. I don't like dual booting personally because I feel like if I did that, it would be a crutch. Like I would be like, oh, I can't do this on Linux. Instead of learning how to do it or learning an alternative, I'll just reboot to Windows because I'm lazy and I wouldn't take the time. And so I probably would have learned a lot less than what I did. So I did dual boot a little bit, but I quickly decided that it was not good if I wanted to learn Linux.
I'm a multi-user. I use Mac, Windows, and Linux. I don't like to stick to one thing for too long. I'm the kind of person, if I don't use everything, I feel like I'm out of touch with the thing that I'm not using.
Well, so I do try to reuse those systems periodically, just play around with it a little bit. But honestly, I wouldn't call myself an expert on Windows or Mac OS, yes, because I used it for quite a bit, so I do know what it can do. But Windows nowadays, like you would ask me to debug a Windows computer, I would not know where to start.
Since I do it as on a daily, because here, if you tell anyone about Linux, you mention the word Linux, they ask you if it's a sandwich. So they don't know what Linux is. So it's my bread and butter. Windows is the thing that everybody uses. So I have to keep up to date with that. With Mac, I have to stay up to date with that because I might go work at I see it as maybe one day I have to go work for another Apple store or something. I have to stay in the know. Like that, I know a little bit of everything on every single OS. That satisfies my needs. But before I go, do you agree with this statement? This is a statement, my statement. I state it everywhere. Windows, no matter as much as Windows gets hate, but do you agree with the statement that says Windows is as stable as you make it to be? It's not inherently unstable. It's the way you use it that can make it unstable. The same can be said about Linux too, but
yes, but there is maybe nowadays no, because there was the Windows rot like previously. Even if you did not touch your computer, you rebooted it. Like 1 year after install without having used it, and it was unusable. I don't know what it did. I don't know what Windows did, but it just was crappy as all hell. Even with all the attention to detail and the cleaning up you could do, it did not run for more than a year before needing a reinstall. It just did not. But nowadays, I don't think that's true anymore because defragmentation happens in the background for NTFS and the security has improved, so you don't get as much crap running in the background. And generally, all the crap that is stuff that you install. So I would say Windows 11 is not a very stable OS, just because their updates keep breaking stuff that used to work. But to be honest, we also have that on Linux operating systems, on not all of them, but some of them. And I honestly would not say Windows is bad or terrible OS. It's improved a lot, and you can not like the decisions Microsoft made in Windows 11 with the TPM, the requirements, the Microsoft account, whatever. But in use, it's not terrible. It's not bad. I just prefer Linux, but I don't think it's bad.
The reason I say that a lot is because I had the same base install of Windows since 2013.
Oh,
yeah.
That you upgraded to the more recent versions?
Had Windows 7 pirated, of course, then updated, and the weird thing is, updating a pirated version of Windows 7 to Windows 10 activates Windows 10.
Yeah, it makes it authentic. Yeah,
it still works to this day.
And so now every version is going to be genuine Windows, even though you never paid for it at the time. It's really weird.
But ever since I bought those $10 keys, and I legitimately used one of them. But I upgraded from Windows 7 to Windows 10 to Windows 10 October to Windows 10, all the versions of Windows 10, then Windows 11. And yet last night I updated to Windows 11 22H2 because it was made official last night. And I have not yet, it's been the same install since 2013 on this system on which I dual boot XeroLinux. And I have TPM, of course. I have TPM. It was a thing. I upgraded the hardware, but the license worked. It still works, but I upgraded the hardware.
Keep working unless you change the whole motherboard and every single piece. If you
But-
change the CPU, the SSD, and the CPU in the same
No, I
socket,
replaced the motherboard,
and the light
everything.
kept working.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
It kept working. I was surprised, but I'm not going to mention it to Microsoft so they don't block me. But I've been upgrading the system and I've been running the same thing until I started to use Linux. I just added a SSD, SATA SSD, and a tray. You know those on the front of the case, you like a CD-ROM. You can eject one SSD, put another, and boot another OS. That's what I do for testing. So I installed Linux, and it's been the same install, and I haven't formatted that drive since 2013. So that's why I keep saying that Windows can be stable.
yeah.
It's just-
If you use it properly and you
if
don't
you use it
install-
properly,
and you clean it up and you
yeah.
do a little bit of maintenance, and probably a Linux distro has less maintenance to do to keep it running, but like I don't
No,
think regular people will destroy their Linux install unless they install like really weird stuff off the internet.
If you're running Arch, it's a different story. But anything
well,
else,
yeah.
with Arch, there's a lot of maintenance that you have
Yeah,
to
of
do
course.
to your system. But with that, we're done. Thank you very much for being part of this long-winded
Yeah, thanks for having me.
discussion. And with that, tell the people where they can find you.
Well, on YouTube, the channel is The Linux Experiment. It's also synced on Odyssey if you use that. And I have a Twitter account, which is at The Linux EXP. Same thing on Mastodon. And I'm also on PixelFed if you use that thing. It's basically the Instagram of the Fediverse. I'm also there if you want to see random pictures of where I live. And I think that's about it.
And as for me, I go by Dark Zero for the Linux world. On the tech world, the general tech world, I'm Tech Zero. And if you don't know what XERO in my name means, it's Greek for I know, Xero. So Tech Xero means tech I know. XeroLinux, I know Linux. So you can find me as Dark Zero on Twitter, Fostodon. Fostodon. I don't like to say that word because in Arabic, Fostodon means fart. So you can find me as Tech Zero on Twitter and Fostodon, Dark Zero on Telegram and Discord. So and I'm on YouTube, and that's it. And try out XeroLinux if you wish. It's not a Linux distro; it's a spin. I should rename that on the website. But other than that, yeah. Thank you for being here, Nick, and I'll see you on the flip side.
Bye.